Coming up next on WNIN Lawmakers, we're joined by Indiana State Representative Ryan Hatfield to discuss how the Indiana General Assembly budget session is shaping up. WNIN Lawmakers starts now. Welcome to WNIN Lawmakers. I'm John Gibson, news manager and local host of WNIN FM's Morning Edition. Before we begin our conversation with Representative Hatfield, here's a report from Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith on what happened in the General Assembly this past week.
Indiana is one of 41 states that doesn't allow partisan labels on the ballot for school board candidates. The only people who showed up this week to support a bill to change that were people mad at last year's election results. They say partisan labels promote transparency, but opponents argue they will inject more hyper-partisanship into the process and make it harder to find good candidates. A bill unanimously approved by a Senate committee spells out about a half dozen core services local health departments must provide if they want new, dramatically increased state funding. Despite large support, the measure drew fierce opposition from those fearful of a state takeover of public health, and even some senators who voted yes voiced hesitance about the bill's future. As property values skyrocket around the state, lawmakers are exploring options to provide property tax relief. That includes potentially lowering the caps on how much homeowners will pay. But those solutions likely won't affect this year's tax bills. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
We're joined now by Indiana State Representative Ryan Hatfield, whose district encompasses much of Evansville. Thanks again for joining us, Representative Hatfield. We appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
All right. Well, it is, of course, the long budget session. The governor has presented his priorities for a state budget. What are your thoughts about the governor's recommendations?
A mixed bag. You know, there were certainly some things in the governor's proposal that House Democrats have been fighting for a long time that we were encouraged by. One of those things was something that I've proposed every year since I've been in the legislature, which was ensuring that public school families who are getting behind on textbook fees, that their children aren't harmed by those textbook fees. So we should join one of the 44 states in the country who do not charge for textbook fees. In Evansville, I know that the EVSC still charges for textbooks and then sues if families get behind. This is just an added burden for a needed education, and so we need to ensure that no barrier to getting their textbook is in place. And so it was a mixed bag. I was encouraged by some of the mental health funding and some of the proposals, and we'll see how it plays out.
What are some of the things that perhaps you weren't so impressed with?
Well, you know, the devil is in the details, and so there are tax cut proposals that are currently being aimed to be paid for by tax cut or by tax increases, and so want to see how that shakes out, and want to make sure that we're not just simply cutting taxes for our businesses and then burdening our Hoosier families with those tax increases. I saw one proposal by a Republican senator to do away with the homestead tax, which would put a lot of families at risk of eviction and risk of not being able to pay their tax bill on their property. And so devil's in the details. We'll see how things get worked out. We're a long way from the end of session, and so some of the proposals still need to be fleshed out.
And are there still proposals, or maybe a proposal around talking about the eventual elimination of the income tax in Indiana?
There is, and again, it's not, you know, we'd all love to have tax cuts, and everybody, I think, would join in a chorus of, hey, let's not pay any tax, but it's the services that those taxes go to that are necessary. Everything from our roads to our public schools to our Medicare and Medicaid system, and ensuring that the seniors are able to retire with dignity. So we'll see how they propose to pay for those things. I think that the proposal to cut taxes across the board is great, but let's see how they intend to pay for it. I think that is not an answer they've provided yet.
Yeah. You mentioned that the governor's budget includes eliminating textbook fees for K through 12. Are you optimistic that it may go through now? As you mentioned, you've been calling for that for years.
I have, and thrilled that the governor finally joined me and other supporters of that proposal. Hopeful that it goes through. I'm not seeing it move yet, which makes me nervous, but there's certainly time. It could both move as an independent bill or could be put into the budget, and so we'll see what happens.
All right. Well, House Bill 1421 would allow utilities to recoup the cost of building natural gas plants as they're being built. It passed the Utilities, Energy, and Communications Committee. You were on that committee. Can you tell us more about that bill and how the vote went in the committee?
Yeah, this bill aims to provide recovery for utilities prior to the build, and it's probably not something that I will be in favor of in its current form. Utilities are seeing high profits at the same time that costs are rising for everyday Hoosiers, and so we want to ensure that they're able to continue to build the infrastructure needed to provide efficient and cost-effective electric and gas services to Hoosiers, but at the same time want to make sure that we're not simply providing a gift to utility shareholders while saddling the burden on everyday Hoosiers.
Yeah, you mentioned significant increases in utility bills that we've seen the last couple of years. Of course, some of the rate increases from CenterPoint have caused quite a bit of concern. And so should residents be concerned about this bill? Is this something that might hurt them even more in that area?
I'm not going to vote for anything that I think will rise utility costs for everyday families. And so it's certainly something I'm watching. The question mark is, are these costs passed along anyways? Part of the problem with the current proposal is that they would be able to recover costs without any IURC oversight. And the IURC is the only body reviewing and approving these costs. And so we would want to make sure that there was an approval and a necessity for that increased build. And so we'll see. I am skeptical of the bill as it stands. Certainly has time for amendments. It has not passed the House yet, although it has gone through committee. And so we'll see if there are any amendments added this week.
You mentioned the IURC, that's the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. Speaking of energy, House Bill 1007 passed the House and requires that Indiana have an energy plan. What else is included in that bill? Did you support it?
I have long kind of giggled at the idea of an Indiana energy plan. Every governor, Democrat and Republican, going back decades, has called for an energy plan. And then we created the 21st Century Energy Task Force, which I supported and was hopeful would provide an energy plan. However, unfortunately, that task force has been used by the majority party to simply bring in their friends to provide good news as they see it, and I don't know that we've really gotten the full picture of where we stand. And even if one could argue that we've gotten a full picture, we certainly haven't converted that into any kind of a plan. And so this governor has joined many other governors in calling for a statewide energy plan. I think that we should have one and we need one, but I'm very skeptical that we are any closer today than we were 10 years ago of creating a statewide plan.
What would you like to see in a statewide energy plan, assuming one does come to fruition someday?
One of the most important factors, and it actually is included in a bill that is moving, is that the IURC needs to be required to consider the affordability of utility costs when they approve utility plans. And so what happens is the utility companies have a plan for how to provide service, and they submit that plan to the IURC, the Indiana Regulatory Commission that oversees this. They currently don't have to consider whether or not it's affordable to the everyday family in that area. That ought to be a requirement in any energy plan going forward. Additionally, I think Indiana needs to take climate change seriously and to ensure that we're doing everything we can to move into the 21st century. The states around us the states throughout the country are providing more renewables and ensuring less fossil fuels. And that's not just a climate change proposal, that's also a cost proposal, because what we're seeing are renewable energy is coming down, the cost is coming down, and providing more efficient fuel and energy to households. And so a comprehensive plan that looks at all of the above approach to make sure that Hoosiers, folks in Evansville, Indiana, are not paying extraordinarily high prices that we're not seeing in Kentucky or Illinois or Ohio or the states around us.
Do you think renewable energy, is there enough support for that in the legislature to possibly take some action that would boost renewables in the state?
It's been slow progress over decades, and I don't want to sit here and pretend that there's a majority of folks ready to move in that direction. But it certainly is growing, and what's helping it grow is that renewable energy sources used to be a climate change thing, and now they're a cost thing. And Hoosiers are demanding it because it's more affordable than other sources.
Yeah. Let's move on to House Bill 1006. It passed the House unanimously. It calls for sending people to mental health centers instead of jail in some cases. Basically, what would that look like? Obviously you voted for the bill. What did you think of it?
Yeah, I think that this is part of the governor's call in his budget that I approve of and support, that will expand mental health resources throughout the state. We need to do everything we can to identify who are folks breaking the law because they're criminals and who are folks breaking the law because of a mental health episode, and how do we handle those folks. And what we've learned in I think policing, and I think our police forces are trying to do a much better job at recognizing that when someone's in a mental health episode, they need mental health treatment, and jail is not the appropriate place for them. The big caveat here, and I said it earlier, the devil is in the details. Will we fund it? Will the budget include financing that matches the need? We have an extraordinary need. I'll give a shout out to the City Council led by Alex Burton and Zach Hieronymus and others, and Mayor Winicky, who provided substantial local funding for mental health services. As a state, we need to continue to invest and make sure that the bill, House Bill 1006, that is a good first step, has the funding necessary to make it successful.
What sort of investments are we talking about? New healthcare centers, new facilities, state-run facilities? What are the plans there?
Yeah, I think the plans in House Bill 1006 are, let's identify folks who are doing this well and help support them. I don't think that you'll see a big change in new mental health facilities operated by the state. But I think that what you will find is support for organizations around the state who are already providing great treatment.
Well, let's move on to some other bills currently at the State House. There are a few that target underage transgender therapies. What do you think of those proposals? Do they have any chance of passing?
I think in this Indiana General Assembly you have to say that yes, they have a chance of passing, tragically. Why House and Senate Republicans are so focused on the LGBTQ plus community and transgender children who are just simply seeking to be accepted for who they are and to be loved for who they are and to love whom they want to love. These are kids and young people in our communities whom we know and who we should accept, and it is an ongoing attack, quite frankly, by the Republican majority that is hard to comprehend. It's disappointing. I hope that the bills be defeated. Every year we have an onslaught of bills that attack the LGBTQ community. House Democrats have fought hard against those bills, had some success and defeated many of them. But I think when you ask the question, is it possible they'll pass? In the current state of the legislature, anything's possible, and we need to do everything we can to stay vigilant and to make sure that young people around the state know that they're accepted in this state. We want them to stay here, live here, love who they want to love, and have the family they want to have.
You mentioned, obviously, Republicans have a supermajority. What can Democrats do to stop some legislation, say that obviously you need to get some Republican support as well? And
No
can
doubt.
you?
No doubt. And in the minority, there are a couple of things. One, we need to sound the alarm to let Hoosiers know what's going on in the Indiana General Assembly. But two, there are Republicans who we can work with, particularly on these issues, who are more reasonable and want to create a state and an environment where kids growing up here know that they're accepted and loved here. There is an economic aspect to this, which is every time we pass one of these crazy bills, we lose out on business opportunities. We lose out on companies who say, you know what, I was going to come to Indiana, but we're no longer coming to Indiana. We lose out on conventions and sporting events. Big Ten has canceled events here. So we need to make sure that we have an environment where everyone feels accepted, everyone feels loved, and we grow together.
Let's talk about some of the bills you have filed this year. Can you tell us some of the main ones that you hope to pass?
Sure. I've filed a pair of local bills that will help the county building authority here and add protections for them. I filed a bill to help the coroner, Steve Lockyer, determine how to store records. The coroner currently has to store records for 100 years in hard copy or film, and in the current space that has become impractical, and so we're hoping to save the county about $4 million through a piece of legislation that will let him digitize that information. Also have a spill bill, which would require companies or organizations that spill harmful materials and chemicals into our waterways that are headed towards the water treatment plants to notify them that, hey, we spilled some chemicals that may be headed to the water treatment plant. You would think that'd be a non-brainer. However, it's quite a fight in the General Assembly. We've passed it once before in the House. It died in the Senate. It's getting legs. I'm hopeful that we'll pass it again in the House and be ready for a fight in the Senate to require companies who, perhaps on accident or if a tanker spills over and pours chemicals into our waterways, that we want to know that so that we keep people safe.
So there's no law requiring them to notify authorities if something like that happens?
There's no state law that requires them to do that. There are some federal regulations that require them to notify IDEM. However, there's no requirement that they actually notify the water company that is producing water, drinking water for Hoosiers.
I see. Well, you are the assistant leader for the Indiana House Democrats. Basically, what does that mean? What do you do in that role?
Sure. It's my privilege to serve as the assistant leader. We have leader Phil Giaquina out of Fort Wayne who leads our caucus. And so I help him with strategy and help him devise a plan, a daily calendar to make sure that we're staying on top of the bills that are coming through and producing any amendments that need to be filed to help shape bills in a way that we believe are better for Hoosiers, and then provide any resources to the caucus, help members with their legislative efforts, and so on and so forth. So it's a great privilege.
We mentioned that Governor Holcomb's budget plans. You like some of the measures in there. Under the current political situation, with the governor winding down his time do you think that could help the process and get more done, more of the things you'd like to see done with the governor not having to face re-election?
I hope so. This governor has served at a time where the Republican Party, I think it's fair to say, has gone through some changes, and there's still different factions in the Republican Party that just feel differently about politics and the future of the state. And the governor, I think, has had a hard time navigating that, and so I'm hopeful that given that he is not up for re-election, barred by Constitution, that he'll be more willing to be a louder voice. I think in a lot of ways he's been a positive influence on his party, and I would hope that that'll continue.
Any other bills in the Senate or the House that have caught your attention, good or bad at this point?
Sure. The big legislative effort that I'm working on right now is health care. The governor has proposed a health care cost bill that I'm currently disappointed in, and we'll just see how it takes shape. Currently, I would argue that rather than focusing on the actual end consumer, the who's you're paying the bill at the end of the day. We've allowed the healthcare discussion to become about the hospitals and the insurance companies, both who make a lot of money and both who provide a service. But I want to make sure that if we're going to pass healthcare reforms in Indiana, let's make sure those reforms actually reduce the cost to the person paying the bill rather than simply provide a windfall to the insurance company.
Any other bills that you would like to either see make some progress or perhaps some that you'd rather not see become a reality?
Well, I'll say that there is a big workforce development bill, a training bill headed through the process right now where millions of dollars will be used to help train workers in manufacturing and in all sorts of trade jobs that I think could be a good investment. I'm currently reviewing it, and there's a lot of good in it and some provisions that I'd like to see changed. But even if we're unable to change it, I think that it does a heck of a lot of good. It provides resources to young people in high school to get them into training programs that are saying, hey, if you want to go to college and you believe that's for you, go to college and let's get you the resources to do that. If you don't think that you're ready for college, if you don't think that college is for you and that you're interested in a trade or some other type of manufacturing program, let's make sure that we have those programs robust, training those workers, getting them out of high school ready to go, rather than requiring our employers to take them on unprepared and having to train them themselves. And so,
you mentioned training. There's also a bill, I don't have the number in front of me here, but a bill to help with teacher training, to improve teacher training. Can you tell us the status of that and if you support it?
Yeah, there's a couple of education bills going through, and I'll just tell you right off the top, it's pretty hard in the current state of the Indiana General Assembly to find an education bill worth supporting. However, we're hopeful that we'll be able to move an education bill that provides resources to teachers and doesn't simply provide more requirements. What we've seen over the last 20 years is stagnant pay, but more requirements. And so we're asking more of our teachers with less money and less time. And so I'm hopeful that some of these education bills that help to provide teachers resources, additional pay, and to ensure that they're able to focus in on the classroom rather than all of the extra paperwork that's been put on them over the years. But it's a tough road in education. There's going to have to be a dynamic change in the General Assembly for that, and so we're monitoring those closely.
I believe the governor did call for a raise in teacher pay. I know that's another thing that you've been calling for years. Are you optimistic that will go through?
Yeah, we'll see. This is kind of another place where put your money where your mouth is. And so, look, we joined Republicans, and to their credit, and with a long-standing position held by House Democrats, helped move a teacher pay bill a couple of years ago that provided some substantial funding. We need to do it again to keep up with inflation and to make sure that the money is getting in the hands of teachers. And so I was pleased to see the governor continue to ring that bell. I hope that we'll continue to do that. It'll help attract and keep our best teachers here in Indiana.
I thought, attraction was one of the big issues I believe that the governor raised, to get more teachers to move to and stay in Indiana, correct?
We've gone 20 years where teachers have been under attack, and finally the Indiana General Assembly is starting to say, hey, maybe we haven't had this exactly right. Maybe we need to pay them what they're worth. Maybe we need to make sure that they want to stay in the profession that they love and chose, but pay them appropriately. And so I hope that it'll help attract more teachers. We certainly need more good teachers into the system, and it's just been a hard couple of decades, and the General Assembly, I hope, is starting to wake up.
Yes. That is Indiana State Representative Ryan Hatfield. Representative, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon on the Lawmakers program.
Happy to be here.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again for being with us. Next week, our scheduled guests are Indiana State Senator Vanita Becker and Indiana State Representative Wendy McNamara. Hope you can join us then. I'm John Gibson of WNIN FM. Thanks for watching WNIN Lawmakers.